Hi there. Hi there. Hi, my name is Jacob Schatz. That's me up there. I started the front-end team at GitLab. I currently lead the Meltano team, which is a data science lifecycle startup within GitLab. It's a really cool, oh wait, hold on. Okay. I lead the Meltano team. Bam, there we go, thank you. Data science lifecycle framework at GitLab. So who here has heard of the Gang of Four? I'm not talking about the communist thing here. I'm not talking about the Australian band or the original Sesame Street members or the Teletubbies. I'm also not talking about Sister, Sister, if you squared it. I'm talking about this book, The Design Patterns, Elements of Reusable Object-Oriented Software. The four authors there, they commonly call them the Gang of Four. And this is a whole book about design patterns, and I want to talk about those design patterns. When you hear design patterns, the definition it gives is a reusable solution to a commonly occurring problem within a given context in software design. But I think we can give a better description than that. And the book has been, people have written books about design patterns over and over again. The one that I would currently recommend, because the original one, it's hard to read. It's the original one. This one is a really good one. Dive into design patterns. But design patterns are there to solve a commonly occurring problem. And we're going to see if we can use them in Vue. So here's a problem that you might face in Vue. You have many complex forms, not just like many complex forms, but like a ton of complex forms in Vue. And your form thing might look like this. You might have, complaint form, contact form, damn it, another form, forgot, password form, Gary's form, register form. And then you just have all these forms, and it's like too many forms, and you're repeating the whole thing over and over again. So what if I told you that you could just wind up with something like this? Just one component and two helper classes. In fact, we're going to take the two helper classes and put it into one. So that was only going to be two files. So the solution is what the Gang of Four calls the builder design pattern. The builder design pattern is where you use, where you want your code to be able to create different representations of some product. So let's say you're creating a house. And you want a stone house, a wooden house, a brick house, etc. And you want just one simple solution for that. So this is the builder. Does anybody know who that is? That's Bob. Does anybody know who that is, the director? That's Steven Spielberg. So you have a builder and a director class. And your builder has all these parts. If he's building a car, he would know how to make the door, the steering wheel, the brake, the gas. He would know how to make all these individual parts. And the director would say, I would like a sports car. So after the builder puts all those pieces together, as the director asks, then you get yourself a sports car. So what would this look like if we actually implemented it really nicely? So here's a really simple app.vue. We're importing our form builder on line 4, we're just using form builder. Actually, I have the wrong import there on line 17. But on line 4, form builder. And we just say form method, make user sign in. And that's just going to create a nice user sign in. And then we can pass it all sorts of stuff. So here's what our form builder component looks like. Notice there is no template, because what we're going to do is we're going to generate our template dynamically using the H method, which is create element. Now, create element, you tell it the tag you want it to create, you tell it all the properties, and then you tell it the children, and you can keep doing this recursively for as long as you want. Notice what we have on line 6 is we have a form director. We create a new form director. We create a new form builder. The form builder, we're going to pass H so we can use it to actually build stuff. And the director, we're going to pass that method, that prop, that form method that got passed in, and we're going to also pass it the builder. So the director is going to tell the builder to build things, and then in the end, on line 9, we're going to get all the stuff that the builder built, and it will return this beautiful form. any type of form you want, magically. So let's see how this would work. Our form builder class, here's the constructor, just a few lines of code here. Can anybody see this? I'm just kidding. I had to say that. Oh, man. So in the constructor, we're passing h, and we just save it as an instance variable, this.h. And then we save an array called this.fields as an array of all the fields that you're going to create. Now, what this says isn't really important. This is like your make door method if you were a builder that makes cars, or make door if you were a builder that makes houses. We're making the fields, so set fields, and you pass it an array of fields that's built into objects. In fact, I didn't even include everything you need here to reproduce this. You can do that yourself, and you can look at the sample afterwards. It's all on Code Sandbox, and I'll link to it in a second. So you have set fields, which is basically like your make door, make pedal, make gas. This form input is not included here. It wraps it to make it all nice in Bulma. Bulma CSS. Anybody ever use Bulma CSS? Awesome. Yeah, Bulma's fantastic. And then you have your set submit. So then the director, all he has to do is use the methods that the builder has. So make user sign in. We could also do make user registration, make credit card form. And we just call builder.setFields. We'll pass a username, and we also want a password field. And if you don't pass type, it's just going to default to text. And then we call builder.setSubmit. So it's like, it's like building the individual parts from the director. And so we call set submit, and in the end, we wind up with this beautiful user sign-in form. So form builder, form method, make user sign-in form. But that's not all. Wait, there's more. Here's a make user registration form, the same exact output, form builder, form method, make user registration form. And then we also have one for a credit card. You could make as many of these as you want. It's just the director has to be modified to make a different type of form. And so it's really highly reusable, and those fields are dynamically created, so there's no template. And then you get perfectly styled things, and you can create helpers, and everything's really nice. So you can go check that out at jacobschatz.com/viewbdp, where BDP stands for Builder Design Pattern. That'll redirect you to a code sandbox. And that's the builder design pattern. And that's an example of how you could use design patterns in Vue. So that's just a tiny taste. But we can do so much more. This is going to blow your mind. The last talk, the most blow your mind talk ever. Okay. Here's another problem. Vuex components sometimes aren't reusable because they have this state that's kind of tied into them. And then your app is getting huge, and you're getting lost within your app. So the solution is the command design pattern. Now, I didn't make up any of these design patterns. These are all from the book. A command design pattern is what's called a behavioral design pattern that turns every request into a standalone object that contains all the information about the request. So in Vuex, you dispatch an action, and then that action runs as a method. In a command, you create a command that winds up being a standalone object, well, a standalone something, you'll see in a second. And then what's really beautiful about this is we can save that and keep calling commands and save all those commands. When we save all those commands and we put them in a stack data structure, suddenly we have undo built in, or we have buffering of different commands. The rule is, in design patterns, is that your UI, your GUI, shouldn't have access to your business logic. So in a typical situation, you might have a button. The button calls update 2, another button might call update 3. In this situation, the GUI has direct access to your business logic, and that's a problem. We can separate that. So we should do business time through a logic layer. So this is what it would look like. You have your 3 buttons, and now we have our save command, because they all need to do saving. And so we can use one command for 3 buttons. And that save command is the thing that actually does the business logic. And you're saying, oh, well, it's still kind of tied to the save command and stuff like that. But wait, there's more. One interface, no parameters. So here's your save command. Anytime you create a command using the command design pattern, it has one method, and that is execute. But we're going to add more methods in a second. It's going to blow your mind. Okay, the GUI doesn't call the commands. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take another design pattern called the observer pattern and stick it in between. Watch this. So now, when you click a button, it's going to dispatch an event using the observer design pattern, which is different than PubSub. I'm not going to tell you how it's different right now, but go look it up. So the first button dispatches menu.save. The second button dispatches GUI.save. The third button dispatches shortcut.save. And somewhere, we're going to map that event to that command. We're going to create a new command, and then the command goes off and does the business logic. So when you actually create a command, when you use an existing command, this is what it looks like. Let's say it's a picture command. You create a new command. Command equals new picture. So notice we're creating an actual instance every time. So that means every time you click a button, a new instance of a class is being created. You might think this is expensive, but it's not. It's not at all. And then you just call command.execute. So to show you back again, this is what it looks like. And this has huge benefits. So you think about when you're sitting in a restaurant and it's the 80s and you want to order some food. You wouldn't talk to the chef directly because you would never get your food. Instead, you talk to a server. The server writes down everything that you want, and she goes around to other tables and writes down what they want, and then hands all of those things to the chef. The chef then puts it in a queue, and then when he's ready to make your food, he pulls it down from the queue, looks at it, and makes the food. So this is one thing you could do with the command pattern. You could line up a bunch of commands and just not execute them until later. Imagine you're making a game where you do turn-based something, and you could line up a bunch of individual commands, press play, and then you just execute the commands that are in an array. That's one way to do that. It's also really easy to implement undo. Imagine if on each one of these things that the server puts down, it says exactly what you wanted. Well, that makes it really easy to store that state of what you wanted, makes it really easy to undo it. And to make this even easier on you, I did a little thought experiment. This is just an experiment. You can check it out. It's a project called Vue Commander. And you got to make a website then, right? So there's vuecommander.com. Now, if we were making a to-do app, every time you type in this little input field and every time you click done, little events are getting fired off. And the cool thing about that is that events get fired and someone can choose to listen to them or not listen to them. It's not coupled to anything at all. The events just get fired. Somewhere, we're going to map those events to commands, and those commands are going to call execute, and the commands will have a reference to your state, and it will update your state. Kind of want to show that animation again, just because it's kind of fun. And it took me a little bit of time to make it. So every time an event fires, those events are going to be mapped somehow to a command. The command fires, and the command has access to your state and updates your state. Really nice decoupling. Rinse, wash, repeat. Do that over and over again, and you've got yourself a way to build a really big, large application. So now, let's take a look at how you would actually implement this in a to-do app. If you look at that Vue Commander, you can look at the code. There's examples in there of exactly what I'm talking about so that you don't have to just like absorb all this right now, because I know it's a lot. It's a lot. Your application might look something like this. App.js, which is your typical app.js if you were making this with Vue CLI. You've got your components to-do.vue and to-dos, plural.vue, for the list of to-dos. And then you have your state, to-dos model. And then you have your commands, which is the new thing we talked about, and the context, which is going to map the commands to an event. So let's take a look at the to-do model. Check this out. This is extremely complicated. No, I'm just kidding. It's 4 lines of code. 7 lines of code, you have just an object with to-dos in it, And each to-do has an ID, has content, and it has whether it's done, true or false. For our individual commands, we need 3 commands because we're doing a to-do application. We want to do add, to do done, and to do delete. Those are the 3 things a to-do list has to do. A to-do list has to do. I'm glad you're enjoying this as much as I am. So in our add command, notice that we can just reference the to-do model because the to-do model is just an object. And as you might know, when you just make an object literal and export it, it acts as what's called in design patterns a singleton. Now, I know there's a saying that says, friends don't let friends use singletons, but we're going to use a singleton here. And the thing is that when we import to-do model, we get the same reference to the same object every time. So no matter where we import that to-do model, we just get the to-do model. And in our to-do add command, there's our one method execute. It creates a to-do, but notice that we need some context here. What is the stuff that we need to pass to the to-do? It's the event. And notice that execute doesn't take any parameters because that's a no-no. Instead, Vue commander is going to create that command, and it's going to pass the event to the constructor, which you could do also. If you create a new command, you could just pass in the event that got dispatched to the constructor. This is not hard to make. Vue commander's very few lines of code you'll see. And then our to-do model, we just push a new to-do, and to-do model.current input, we make it blank again, because every time you press enter, the input should blank out. And then what would our to-do done look like? Okay, to-do done. That's pretty simple. All we do is we get an instance of the right to-do we want, and we just toggle the done. Done, true or false. Whatever it was, do the opposite. And it just has an execute method. It's getting past the events through the constructor. And then the to-do delete command. Same thing, just an execute function. Method. It's a class, it's a method. It gets past the event, and then we're doing kind of a poor man's solution here. We have remap indices, because we're just grabbing it by the index, and we're just, like if you were to pull something out of an array, you now have like 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're just going to remap it as a cheap solution for right now. Remap indices is not a native function, but if you go check out the code, there's remap indices is included in there. So commands, done. Components, what would that look like? Let's check it out. So we have 2 components in our to-do app, to-dos, plural, and to-do, singular. Let's take a look at to-dos, plural. Now, let's just grab this one piece at a time here. The input is the input that you're going to input a to-do into. And we can bind to the value. You can't use vmodel here because vmodel wouldn't work with this. But we bind to the value of the current input. And on enter, when you press enter, it's going to call a method called submit to do. And we're going to see what that looks like in a second. The next part is on line 8. We just create an empty state. If there's no to-dos, then we write nothing left to do. And then we loop through all of our to-dos with a v4, and we have access to it. And then we just pass it down as a prop to that component. And then notice what we do. We're importing that model, which is kind of like dependency injection. We get that one instance of that model that we were changing in the command. And this is not something special that I wrote in Vue command. This is just how JavaScript works. So in the data attribute, instead of creating individual properties, we're just mapping it directly to our to-do model. And if you had multiple models, you could namespace them and make it really neat. And then our methods we'll call submit to do. And because this is a Vue plugin, just like in Vuex, you have $store, this.$store. We have this.$context, which has events, which with our observer pattern, we can now call notify, dispatch an event, and send the input field's contents off to some event. Now this is reusable because you would ship it with its state, which you could also do with Vuex. You could create an individual module for each component. But with this, you can also just ship it with to-do model. And because it's just dispatching an event, it's up to somebody to implement that event for you. And then for our individual to-do, we're just going to put the to-do content in there as one would, and we're going to have a couple of buttons, done and delete. Delete is only going to show up if done is true. And then for the rest of the script, all we're doing is we have two methods, to-do done, to-do delete. And we're just dispatching an event, events.notify, dispatch to-do.done, dispatch to-do.delete. All this for what reason? You're going to see in a second. It's going to blow your mind. Now, we're going to map the events to the commands with our context. So just like you would in Vuex, you'll create a new commander, view commander.context, and you'll map to-do.done to to-do-done command, and you'll map the event to the command. I'm going to stop saying to-do in a second. That's on my to-do list. Sorry, that's a really bad joke. And then in your app.js, you'll, just like you do in Vuex, instead of putting a story, you put a context. And so what does this look like? Now we're using our app just as you would create a Vue app. The one really cool thing that you'll see in a second, which it works, great, is that you can undo, which is something that's built in, because the command pattern, when people implement undo, when software developers implement undo, you kind of take undo for granted. You just assume it works. It's a very tricky thing to implement, and there's two design patterns that people typically use when they're doing it right. One is the command design pattern, and the other one is the memento design pattern. In the command design pattern, we have these individual commands that are getting executed. That's what we just did. In the memento, that's what Vue DevTools does, is it takes an entire snapshot of the state and saves individual whole snapshots. And there's pluses and minuses to both ways of doing undo. With the memento, you have this huge state that you're saving every time, so it's a very large thing. But you can go back in time really easily. With the command pattern, you save only what you want, and it knows how to undo itself. So it's a little more work. So we get undo. How do we do that? Let's show you how to implement undo. Now, this is how you would do it if you were doing the command pattern yourself. I'm just making it a little easier by wrapping it around a little library. So Vue commander is going to call save state before it calls execute every time. And when you're ready to undo, you just call undo. So save state's just going to take a state, a snapshot of the state, and you can save whatever you want. In the case of done, all we have to save is whether it was true or false. We don't have to save the to-do object itself. We just have to save true or false, which is kind of cool. And then undo, undo will just restore the state using the backup. And so in our to-dos.vue, we now have this undo button, and we'll call the method undo, and this is really cool. This is like this.context.history, because every time it executes, it's going to store that command object on a history array, and pops off the last item of the first item of an array. No, the last item. Which one is it? Thank you. And then it just calls undo because it's a stack. Now I'm going to show you an animation here. So every time you run a command, it gets put onto a stack. That's a stack design pattern. That's command.execute, and then internally it does history.push, and it pushes that command on. And then when you're ready, it's going to call history.pop, which is going to give you the last command, and you're just going to call undo, and it's going to execute undo. So it's a really, really easy way to do undo. So just to show you again, every time you're typing in here, every time you're pressing enter, a new command is getting executed. Every time you click on a button, another command is getting executed. When you click on undo, it's just calling the undo function, which is just popping one of the items off the history and just running its undo function. It's kind of magical in that way. So these are just 3 design patterns that I showed you. There are tons of them, and I highly recommend that you go read about them. In the book that I suggested, you can Google them, and they're often written in a lot of different languages, but they're really easy to implement in JavaScript. You don't have to buy a book or anything. You can pretty much just Google it. And there are tons, and you should go look at them. And I only showed you 3, so go read about them. Thank you very much.